think your work's very abstract. Has it always been as abstract as it is now?
Not really. Not really. When I left college, I was doing very representational work, but I didn't feel really that's what I wanted to do. So I spent, well, quite a long time actually experimenting to push representational things into an abstracted form, something that I had a sort of a freedom to work in, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Did that happen sequentially, or did you have a blinding flash of inspiration and change styles, or?
Well, I just felt that I wanted to, for me, I don't really like representational work. This is for me, that is. I feel that if you want to do something that's totally representational, it's better to make a photograph of it or whatever. That would certainly be my case. But so what I wanted to do was actually to make a series of languages, if you want, a series of subjects that I could colour and I could make that were based on something that was representational, but would in fact, when you see the end result, wouldn't be. But it'd be my way of portraying that particular subject.
You say languages, a series of languages, symbols or representations?
Symbols, really. Symbols that mean something for me. I mean, I can sort of have a certain symbol which I like, and I feel I can...
Such as?
Something, it could be like a tremendous loop or a large triangle which could be have a certain line or a shape on it. For example, I did quite a lot of landscapes, my style of landscapes, using a series of dots. Well, those dots, for example, I got from the sides of motorways where they are planting new trees. And as you sort of pass between them, you see all these dots, and then they turn into lines. Well, these I just made a note of these, and actually I use these in paintings where there isn't such a thing, but it's just a shape that I like. And according to the syntactic structure, if you like, of these shapes, then that's how the painting arrives.
So your current style evolved through a series of processes, experiments?
Yes, experimental work. Two types of experiments, really. One which was black and white, and one which was very highly coloured. And these were actually, in a way, very disciplined, and over a period of about 10 or 12 years. And I was working to a goal, a very, very simple goal, really. I just wanted a way to express an idea in my own style. I could see something, and then I could say, yes, I want to paint that.
Word discipline, you mean discipline as an artist, or discipline within the work of art?
Well, both in a way. I mean, I feel that I treat painting like work. I mean, I'm quite disciplined in that respect. I mean, I don't believe in blind inspiration, and one carries on like that. What I like to do is just to simply see something and, as I say, know the way I want to paint it. And I know that if I have these disciplined experiments in a certain order, then I know that I can do that.
You say there, and you know the way you want to paint it. By that, you don't necessarily imply there is only one way to paint it.
Oh, no,
you have a whole series of different forms of that representation?
Sure, yes. I mean, quite often I can get one idea, and I need to do maybe a dozen paintings until I've really got it right. There are many sort of, quite often, in fact, when you do the first painting, you feel, well, I haven't done that adequately. I can push it further, and then from that you can push something else further, and so it goes on.
What are the sorts of variables that might change in that series?
Oh, certainly there are some areas which, in a painting, certainly if it's quite a busy painting, it can be actually magnified in one corner. You find that that painting is a painting in its own right. When you actually make that painting in its own right, you find that something will spark off from that. It needs a certain balance or a certain colour.
Colour, you have very strong colour combinations.
Yes.
Are they always the same? Were they colours you've always used?
Well, actually not. I mean, when I was making experiments with colour, when I was talking about this sort of black and white and the colour experiments, I used a lot of greens and browns and so forth, which I hardly ever use at all now. Because from using those, I found those that weren't the colours that I was happy with. I've got a very limited palette, and I don't actually mix colour either. I mix it, if it accidentally mixes or overlaps on a painting, that's fine, that's good. And there are quite often there's sort of, in a way, accidental, semi-accidental marks, which are probably the most successful parts of a painting. So, yes, a big area of one colour means something, and a small area of another means something else. And that is just as much the importance in a painting as the shape of that colour.
I haven't seen your most recent work, but the stuff I've seen up until recently, very strong, bold colours, reds, yellows, blues.
Right.
You mentioned greens and browns that have disappeared out of your painting.
That's right.
Was it because they weren't bold enough, or...?
I just felt that I hadn't got a sort of, in a way, a rapport with those colours. Some of the yellows and some of the reds that I use are very much connected with the subject that I'm doing. For example, a lot of the reds and yellows that I'm using at the moment are based on Spanish music, for example. But something that was a brown just didn't, well, to use a silly phrase, just didn't do anything for me. It was just a dead colour, and I like them to be vibrant. Even if they're sombre, they have to be vibrant.
Would you say reds and yellows are more indicative of the Spanish landscape and therefore Spanish music and therefore reflected in your art?
Well, certainly much the Catalan colours, and yes, that's right, the warmth. I like a warm colour, but I also, to a certain extent, like to, and quite often do, balance them with cold colours as well. So, for example, in another series that I've done recently, and I'm still working on, incidentally, was a series from Polish landscapes. I've just come back from spending some time in Poland, and from those I've used actually whites and purpley blues, again against some reds, which have formed something which is very living and vibrant. A painting has to live.
Are they effectively reflective of the weather in those countries that has an impacts on the environment in actual fact?
I wouldn't exactly say the weather, but to a certain extent the atmosphere that the weather creates. One painting I've done is called Morskie Oko, which was a result of a long walk, a country walk, through snow and through ice, and to arrive halfway at a station near a mountain. And there's a lake, a frozen lake, which is called Morskie Oko, which means the eye of the mountain. And suddenly I had an idea for painting, and the colour sequences were almost obvious.
I suppose thinking through that question again, perhaps I meant light rather than weather in the mountains and the snow, the parabolic mirror that you saw and influenced some of your whole period of your work, I believe. Isn't it?
That's right. Yes, exactly. These were from the same type of landscape, really. These were the types of painting I did in 1978 from the south of France. Yes, exactly. I mean, that was very much a reflective idea in every sense of the word, which gave me the landscape idea plus the feeling of the landscape. So, of course, the colour combinations were, in a way, almost obvious.
And that's very suitable to your style because the sharpness of colours in snow mountains and shadows and direct lines and colour combinations.
It also gave me a freedom, too. The big problem with my work is the fact that although I'm very disciplined in that respect, I also want the freedom to make, if you like, the excitement of the original sketch. Quite often you do a sketch and it works brilliantly and you say, okay, I'll take that home and make a painting from it, and the painting just dies on you. That to my way of thinking, is because it's lost its sort of initial spontaneity, which you do have to have, I think, when being excited about a painting. So I have to try and combine the two. So although I use very free brush strokes, well, not brush strokes because I don't actually use brushes, but using free movement, I have to have that within my series of languages and shapes.
You mentioned you don't use brushes.
No.
That's a strange admission for a non-artist.
Well, well, occasionally I use brushes, but very, very occasionally. Normally I use rags dipped in the actual paint, so I squeeze the paint straight onto the rag and paint with that, and paint with that with the varying degrees of turpentine, so I know exactly. This is the whole point of this discipline, is knowing exactly what the paint will do, and that's how I have that freedom.
So the tool gives you more freedom?
Oh, very much so. I work on two sizes of paintings. One is 152 by 122 centimetres, and the other is 92 by 122. And the reason I stick to these sizes is that I know what designs will fit onto those boards. Quite a lot of the paintings I do are actually several of these panels linked, but each panel has a statement, if you want to say, in its own right, a statement to me, that is.
And do you do any more detailed work rather than with large rags and large circles and large shapes?
Well, within the painting, do you
Yes, and if so, do you use brushes then, or do you?
Well, sometimes I use baby buds dipped in the paint, which I find that then you can actually draw in paint. So you have once again a freedom, which is what the big problem about painting at all, which I incidentally find very hard work, is the fact that you can be restricted, and in that way it inhibits you. It inhibits your subject. So what I like to do is, in effect, be as free as possible, absolutely as free as possible. And then when the painting is finished, even if it's unfinished, if it's finished to me, then the atmosphere of that painting has been created, and that's it. It's ready.
You mentioned earlier you had two strands, dimensions, the black and white and the colour.
Right.
Many people would say, well, black and white sketching precedes a colour representation, which I know not to be the case. But
Yeah.
what was it in your case?
Well, the whole idea was that, as I said before, I wanted to, in a way, to have not a style exactly, but a way of expressing something. I wasn't really worried about the technique, but I was worried about, in a way, the actual method of transferring an idea from my mind, if you want, to a board. So I experimented for several years using just black and white, which meant that I had to rely on my drawing, if you like. I mean, drawing is extremely important to me. Basic drawing, that is, a traditional drawing. And so I only had to rely on the shapes and the sort of rhythm and the shapes between the shapes, if you like. So it had to have a sort of continuity from one side of the board to the other. Had I added colour at that time, it would have ruined the whole thing. It would have given a balance which I didn't want. I knew that putting a large red shape or a large green shape would do something, but that would change the balance, and I didn't want that.
You mentioned drawing there, and yet now, would you say you don't do any drawing at all?
Not really, no, I don't. No.
Drawing implies a kind of detail and a fineness and a control that perhaps, well, my control's wrong. You can still have control at that level.
Well, yes, I mean, I believe, again for myself, I believe in traditional drawing. At art college, one spent several hours a week traditionally drawing life drawing, still life and studio work. And I think actually that's, to me anyway, that's really grammar of abstract work. Has been for me.
So you have grammar. Grammar implies language, language implies communication. What are you trying to tell me in your paintings?
What am I trying to tell you? Well, in a way, I have to admit, I think painters really paint for themselves. I certainly do. I don't mean that in a selfish way, although it is a selfish remark to a certain extent. I don't think anybody in a gallery or whatever can really see what you're getting at, get into the mind of the actual sort of original concept. You can say you like the painting, you don't like the painting, you have a rapport with it or whatever. But I don't think one can ever actually fully understand the original idea. So I'm really painting a painting that in a way pleases me, and if it's finished, it's finished. If other people like it, yes, I'm very pleased, obviously. But I think that's really all you can say.
So you're expressing rather than communicating?
Yes.
When you've expressed something, how do you judge the success in your own terms now?
Oh, it's a very difficult question. Sometimes, well, everybody has always overworked a painting. The secret, I suppose, is to know when to stop. That is a problem. I always underwork paintings. And although I work in a way quite fast, I have sort of breaks where I sit and just stare at a painting and say, well, is this finished or isn't it? Does it need this to be added or not? And will it be the richer or the poorer for having this mark being put there? And quite often you can say, well, yes, this needs a mark, it needs a shape or something. You put it there and it's wrong. You've ruined the paint. You can tell.
You can't subtract?
Yes, you can. I mean, but this, of course, is a lengthy process, and I like, in a way, to be, in a way, if I can use a contradiction, almost a sort of planned spontaneity. So, in a way, that really rather goes against the grain. I like to be able to know that I put that mark in the right place, and it is right. Of course, every painting doesn't work. I mean, if it doesn't work, then
what do you do if it doesn't work?
Paint over it.
Paint over it.
Paint over it.
Abolish it.
Yes, yes. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And yet you talked about series earlier on. So a painting exists in its own right, but exists within a greater whole.
That's right. I mean, there are paintings that, another series I've done from Polish Ideas is a triptych, which are directly related, and they will always hopefully be hung together. They need to be hung together. They rely on each other. But there are some paintings which are part of a series, which, as you say, is a painting in its own right and can be left on its own. But I feel like any form of discussion group, any form of language, which a painting is really, in a way, that the idea must be worked through to its conclusion.
When you say they have to